Welcome to Sleepy Tales. My name is Mateus, and before we begin today's story, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below saying, "I'll sleep well tonight." Now, sit back, relax, and let's dive into tonight's tale. It was a dark and stormy night when 5 teenagers decided to explore the abandoned house on the edge of town. The house had been empty for years, and there were rumors that it was haunted by the ghosts of the former occupants. But the group of friends didn't believe in ghosts, and they were looking for a thrill. The group consisted of Sarah, a popular cheerleader, Mike, a star athlete, Alex, a computer nerd, Jenny, a punk rock girl, and Tyler, an artist. They had been friends since elementary school and always looked for ways to have fun together. As they approached the house, they could see that it was old and decrepit. The windows were broken, and the shutters were hanging off the hinges. The front door was boarded up, but they managed to find a way in through the back. The inside of the house was just as spooky as the outside. The walls were peeling, and the floorboards creaked with every step. The air was musty, and it smelled like something had died inside. But the friends were undeterred, and they began to explore the different rooms. As they walked through the house, they began to hear strange noises. It sounded like someone was walking around upstairs, even though they knew they were alone in the house. They dismissed it as their imagination and continued exploring. But the noises grew louder and more persistent, and they couldn't ignore them any longer. Sarah suggested they split up and search the house for the source of the noises. Mike and Tyler went upstairs, while Alex, Jenny, and Sarah stayed on the ground floor. As they searched the house, the noises grew louder and more unsettling. They could hear doors slamming and footsteps running up and down the hallway. They began to feel like they were being watched, and they started to panic. Suddenly, they heard a blood-curdling scream from upstairs. Mike and Tyler came running down the stairs, and they all huddled together in the living room. They were too scared to move, too scared to speak. And then they heard it. A soft whisper in their ear, a cold breath on their neck. "Get out," it said. "Get out while you still can." They ran for the door, not stopping until they were outside in the rain. They stood there, gasping for breath and trying to make sense of what had just happened. "That was crazy," Alex said, breaking the silence. "Did you guys hear that too?" They all nodded, too shaken to speak. "Let's get out of here," Jenny said. "This place is giving me the creeps." They started to walk back to town, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something was following them. They kept looking over their shoulders, but there was nothing there. When they finally made it back to town, they went to a diner to warm up and calm down. They sat in a booth, drinking hot chocolate and trying to make sense of what had happened. "Do you think the house is really haunted?" Tyler asked. "I don't know," Sarah said. "But I don't want to go back there to find out." The group of friends listened intently as Jack began to explain the history of the abandoned house. He told them about the family who had lived there years ago and the tragedy that had occurred. According to Jack, the family had a son who was troubled and had a history of mental illness. One day, he snapped and killed his entire family before taking his own life. The house had been empty ever since. The friends listened in horror, realizing that they had been inside the house where a family had been murdered. But Jack wasn't finished with his story. He went on to tell them about a legend that had been passed down through the generations. The legend said that on the anniversary of the family's death, the ghost of the son would return to the house to relive the events of that fateful night. The friends were skeptical, but Jack was insistent. He had heard the legend from his grandmother, who had heard it from her grandmother before her. He believed it to be true. The group of friends decided to investigate further. They went to the local library and looked up newspaper articles from the time of the murders. They found that Jack's story was true. The family had been brutally murdered, and the son had taken his own life. As the anniversary of the murders approached, the friends couldn't stop thinking about the legend. They decided to go back to the house to see if there was any truth to it. This time, they went prepared. They brought flashlights, cameras, and even a Ouija board. They were determined to find out what was really happening in the house. As they approached the house, they could feel a sense of unease. It was as if the air itself was heavy with the weight of the tragedy that had occurred there. They entered the house cautiously, making their way through the different rooms. They used the Ouija board to try to communicate with the spirits, but they didn't get any responses. Just as they were about to give up, they heard a noise from upstairs. It was a soft moaning, like someone was in pain. They followed the noise up to the attic, where they found a hidden room. Inside the room, they found a diary belonging to the son who had committed the murders. As they read through the diary, they began to understand the full extent of his mental illness and the reasons behind the tragedy. But then they heard a noise behind them. They turned around to see the ghostly figure of the son standing in front of them. He was transparent and glowing, and his eyes were filled with a wild, unhinged look. The friends tried to run, but the son's ghost followed them. They could feel his cold breath on their necks and hear his moaning in their ears. They ran out of the house and back into the rain, not stopping until they were miles away. As they caught their breath, they realized that they had narrowly escaped the ghost of the son. But then they noticed something strange. Tyler was missing. They searched for him, calling out his name in the darkness. But he was nowhere to be found. They eventually gave up and went back to town, hoping that Tyler would show up later. But he never did. Tyler was never seen or heard from again. The friends were left to wonder if he had been taken by the ghost of the son or if something else had happened to him. They never went back to the abandoned house, and the legend of the ghostly son lived on for generations to come. The remaining friends were left traumatized by their experience at the abandoned house. They couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened to Tyler, and they couldn't stop thinking about the ghostly son and his tragic past. Days turned into weeks, and the friends tried to return to their normal lives. But they were plagued by nightmares and visions of the ghostly son. They found it hard to sleep and were constantly on edge, waiting for something terrible to happen. Then, one night, they received a mysterious phone call. It was Tyler. He was alive, but he sounded different. He was speaking in a strange, monotone voice and didn't seem to remember anything that had happened to him. The friends were confused and scared. They didn't know what to do or how to help Tyler. They decided to go see him and try to get to the bottom of what had happened. When they arrived at Tyler's house, they found him sitting in a dark room, surrounded by candles and strange symbols. He was chanting in a language they didn't understand and didn't seem to notice them at all. The friends were terrified. They didn't know what was happening to Tyler, but they knew it wasn't good. They tried to talk to him, to reason with him, but he didn't respond. Then, suddenly, Tyler stopped chanting and turned to face them. His eyes were glowing with an otherworldly light, and his voice was no longer his own. It was the voice of the ghostly son. The friends tried to run, but they were trapped in the room with Tyler. The ghostly son's voice filled their minds, telling them that they were next, that they would suffer the same fate as his family. Just as they thought all was lost, a beam of light burst through the window. It was the sun, rising on a new day. The ghostly son screamed in pain and vanished into thin air. The friends were left shaken but alive. They managed to break the spell that had been placed on Tyler, and he slowly began to regain his memory and his sense of self. The friends left Tyler's house and went their separate ways, promising never to speak of their experiences again. But the legend of the ghostly son lived on, passed down through the generations as a cautionary tale about the dangers of meddling with the supernatural. Years later, the abandoned house was torn down, and a new building was erected in its place. But some say that on quiet nights, you can still hear the ghostly moaning of the son and the whispers of his victims, reminding us that some things are better left untouched.
Thank you for listening to this bedtime story, and remember, if you struggle with falling or staying asleep at night, click on the first link in the description for the ultimate solution to your problem. Now, choose one of these two videos and continue on our journey in the world of bedtime stories.